Did you know that the 2014 RoboCop reboot, despite a massive budget and a promising modern spin, ended up alienating longtime fans and diluting the brutal, dark satire of the original? In 1987, Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop struck a nerve by blending intense action with a biting commentary on corporate greed, the dehumanizing effects of technology, and the pervasive corruption of society. Its visceral imagery and uncompromising tone created a cult classic that resonated with audiences for its raw edge and dark humor. Fast forward to 2014, and the reboot promised to update this iconic narrative for the new generation. Yet instead of recapturing the original's fearless satire and gritty realism, it settled for a sanitized, overly action-driven blockbuster that felt hollow and safe. So before we dissect these issues point by point, a real quick ask that if you're new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, please take a second to hit that subscribe button now. It's one small click for you, but a huge deal for us. Now, let's get into what went wrong with RoboCop 2014. Reason number 1, the loss of satire. One of the most crucial elements that made the original RoboCop a groundbreaking film was its sharp, unflinching satire. Verhoeven's version of RoboCop was a dark, allegorical commentary on the state of society, using hyper-violent imagery and absurd humor to expose the rot beneath modern capitalism. In the 2014 reboot, however, that signature satirical bite is largely missing. The film attempts to update the narrative for a modern audience, but in doing so, it ends up watering down the social commentary that was so integral to the original. What once was a searing indictment of corporate excess and government apathy now feels like a generic R-rated superhero flick, one that avoids controversy in favor of safe, polished action sequences. Instead of leaning into dark humor and biting irony, the reboot reduces its social commentary to a handful of limp observations, like a news anchor having a meltdown on live TV. Gone are the exaggerated corporate ads, the unsettlingly cheerful dystopian media, and the satirical bite that made the original so haunting. The film's political commentary is on the nose, and many of its jokes fall flat without the biting irony that made the original so memorable. Moreover, the cultural context has shifted. While the original resonated during a time of rampant corporate power and visible government corruption, the reboot's attempts to comment on modern issues like surveillance and corporate ethics lack the same urgency and edge. It's as if the reboot is caught between trying to be a safe blockbuster and pay homage to a radical classic, resulting in a film that satisfies neither mandate. In short, by losing that razor-sharp satirical edge, RoboCop 2014 fails to stand out in a crowded field of modern action films. Reason number 2, too much action. If there's one thing that RoboCop 2014 is guilty of, it's letting flashy, high-octane action overshadow its narrative. The original film balanced explosive action with a thoughtful exploration of identity and humanity, an equilibrium that gave the movie its distinctive voice. In contrast, the reboot seems obsessed with delivering a continuous barrage of CGI-enhanced action sequences at the expense of meaningful storytelling. From the opening moments, RoboCop 2014 bombards viewers with sleek, hyper-stylized action, high-speed chases, tactical shootouts, and an endless parade of CGI spectacle. But while it looks expensive, it rarely feels meaningful. While these sequences are undoubtedly impressive from a technical perspective, they often feel disconnected from the character-driven story that should be at the heart of the film. Instead of allowing audiences to engage with Alex Murphy's internal struggle and transformation, the narrative is frequently interrupted by prolonged set-piece after set-piece. The overemphasis on spectacle leaves little room for character development. The emotional core that made the original RoboCop resonate, Murphy's battle to reclaim his humanity in a brutal corporate dystopia, is diluted by the constant need to dazzle viewers with effects. The reboot feels more like an expensive video game than a movie with a soul. The result is a film that, despite its impressive visuals, lacks the emotional punch and thematic depth necessary to create any kind of impact. Critics argue that this focus on action was partly driven by a desire to appeal to a contemporary audience that craves that visual spectacle. However, by stripping away the layers of nuance and social commentary, RoboCop 2014 ends up feeling generic, a formulaic blockbuster that fails to innovate. The audience is treated to a series of very well-executed action sequences, but with little narrative context or emotional stakes. The thrills remain empty and fleeting. When every scene is designed solely to impress visually, the story's underlying themes and messages are lost, leaving viewers with an experience that is all flash and no substance. Reason number 3, inconsistent tone. One of the most perplexing issues with RoboCop 2014 is its struggle to strike the right tone. The original was renowned for being a dark, gritty, atmospheric blend of brutal action and satirical commentary. It was a film that wasn't afraid to delve into the harsh realities of corporate control and the dehumanization of modern society. Yet the reboot finds itself caught in a tonal tug-of-war, ultimately resulting in a sanitized version that lacks that necessary edge because it's been cleaned up by corporate committees. On one hand, the film attempts to honor the legacy of the original by retaining elements of its dystopian world and themes of identity loss. On the other, it softens these elements in an effort to appeal to a broader, more mainstream audience. The result is a movie that feels like it's constantly shifting gears, at times trying to be a serious drama about a man struggling against a ruthless corporate machine, and at other moments veering into generic action flick with predictable humor. This inconsistency is jarring, to say the least. Scenes meant to be chilling and thought-provoking are diluted with overly polished visuals and very safe dialogue. The dark humor and brutal social commentary that define Verhoeven's vision are replaced by scripts that avoid controversy at all costs. Even the violence, which was a cornerstone of the original's commentary on the dehumanizing effects of corporate greed, is toned down to the point where it loses its impact. The reboot's inability to commit to a cohesive tone leaves the audience unsure of what to feel. Should we be outraged, saddened, or simply entertained? Rather than deliver a bold, uncompromising vision, the film seems like it's afraid to take a stance, watered down, unfocused, and desperately trying to please everyone, and in doing so, succeeding at pleasing no one. In trying to be all these things, RoboCop ends up being neither daring nor distinctive. The film's tone is a critical casualty, ultimately weakening the very themes that should have defined its narrative. Reason number 4. Flat character development. At the heart of any great remake of a classic is the protagonist's journey. In the original RoboCop, Alex Murphy's transformation from wounded cop to conflicted, almost tragic figure trapped between his human past and his mechanical future was what made the film resonate. His internal struggle, his gradual reclamation of humanity in the face of relentless corporate dehumanization was the emotional core of the movie. In stark contrast, the 2014 reboot offers a version of Murphy that feels disappointingly flat. Instead of a nuanced exploration of identity and loss, Murphy's character arc is reduced to a series of action-driven set pieces with little emotional continuity. Joel Kinnaman's portrayal, though technically proficient, fails to capture the raw vulnerability and moral ambiguity that made Peter Weller's Murphy so iconic. In the original, RoboCop's journey was tragic, an identity crisis wrapped in a violent satire. Peter Weller's Murphy barely spoke, yet every robotic twitch hinted at a human soul trying to claw its way out of that metal case. In contrast, the reboot's Murphy lacks any kind of internal struggle. He's just a guy in a high-tech suit going through the motions. This lack of development is particularly evident in the film's handling of Murphy's relationship with his family. In the original, his personal struggles and the pain of losing his humanity were intertwined with his longing to reconnect with what he once was. However, the reboot hardly delves into these themes at all. Instead, it treats Murphy's personal life as a minor subplot, often sidelined in favor of, you guessed it, relentless action and spectacle. The emotional stakes that should have been the forefront are buried beneath layers of sanitized dialogue and generic hero moments. The missed opportunity here is palpable. RoboCop was meant to be a story about the cost of losing one's humanity in the face of corporate greed. But instead, the film ends up portraying Murphy as little more than a walking action figure, a protagonist who's proficient at fighting but fails to evoke empathy or reflection. Without a compelling internal transformation, the film loses its soul and reduces what should have been a profound, singular character study of humanity into a forgettable corporate reboot of a very familiar concept. Reason number 5. Uninspired antagonists. No blockbuster is complete without a formidable antagonist, and the original RoboCop boasted villains that were as iconic as they were over the top. The corporate machinations of Omni Consumer Products, or OCP, and the cold, calculating brutality of its executives provided a stark, biting critique of corporate power. In that film, the villain was the embodiment of a corrupt system, a true antagonist that challenged both RoboCop and the audience. In the 2014 reboot, however, the villainous figures fall painfully short. Michael Keaton's character, intended to be the embodiment of corporate greed and hubris, is rendered bland and uninspired. Instead of delivering scathing, memorable lines or exuding an aura of menacing authority, his performance feels almost apathetic. A far cry from the visceral impact of the original's antagonists, the nuances that made the corporate villain in the original so threatening are watered down, replaced by generic bad guy tropes that lack both charisma or a clear motive. Moreover, the reboot struggles to establish a cohesive identity for its villains. While the original tackled themes of corporate exploitation head-on, the new version muddles its messaging by mixing in an array of poorly defined motivations. The antagonists seem more interested in serving as obstacles for RoboCop rather than as fully realized characters who embody the societal critiques at the heart of the story. There's an absence of that dark satire and irony that made the original villains compelling. Here, they're nothing more than cardboard cutouts who fail to leave a lasting impression. The lack of a truly formidable antagonist undermines the film's stakes. Without a villain who genuinely challenges the hero and embodies the corrupt forces of the system, the conflict loses its edge. The audience is left with a sense of anticlimax, wondering where the tension is supposed to be coming from. In a story that hinges on the interplay between a man fighting for his humanity and the dehumanizing power of corporate systems, the failure to craft an inspiring, multidimensional villain is one of the film's most significant missteps. Reason number 6: studio interference and bad timing. In the case of RoboCop 2014, even a promising concept can be derailed by too much external meddling. One of the most frequently cited issues is the extensive studio interference that plagued the project from inception to release. Director Jose Padilla, initially hailed for his work on Elite Squad, was chosen to helm the reboot because he could blend raw, gritty realism with biting social commentary. On paper, he was the perfect fit to modernize this classic. However, the reality turned out to be very different. The director came in with a vision, a grounded, intense reboot with a fresh perspective. But according to reports, MGM executives micromanaged nearly every decision, sanding off the edges until nothing remained of the film's original bite. With a budget that reportedly soared as high as $130 million, the pressure to deliver a commercially safe PG-13 blockbuster was immense. This pressure led to a watered-down script that avoided the R-rated violence and dark satire that made the original impactful in the first place. Padilla was forced to compromise on many of his creative ideas, and key scenes were reworked multiple times to appease studio demands. As a result, what should have been a bold, uncompromising film turned into a safe, sanitized reboot that lacked the edge and daring spirit of Verhoeven's original. Ultimately, the commercial pressures imposed by the studio stripped away the creative risks that would have made this reboot a standout. Instead of being a film that challenged its audience and redefined the genre, it became yet another example of Hollywood's tendency to play it safe, sacrificing art for profit, and in the process, losing what made the original groundbreaking. Reason number 7: failure to connect with fans. Perhaps the most critical flaw of RoboCop 2014 is its inability to connect with the fans that cherish the original movie. The 1987 RoboCop wasn't just a futuristic action movie, it spoke to the dehumanizing effects of corporate greed, the loss of humanity in the age of technology, and the struggle of being trapped in an oppressive system. Fans loved Alex Murphy not only for his relentless fight, but for his deeply personal journey of reclaiming his identity in a cold, mechanized world. In contrast, the 2014 reboot largely misses that emotional mark. The filmmakers seemed more concerned with creating a visually polished blockbuster than with capturing the raw, unfiltered spirit of the original. Joel Kinnaman's portrayal of Alex Murphy is competent, but it lacks the tortured intensity and vulnerability that made Peter Weller's performance so iconic. Instead of offering a nuanced exploration of Murphy's inner conflict, the reboot presents him as a generic action hero, a man in a high-tech suit who fights well but never truly struggles with the loss of his humanity. This failure to connect is compounded by the film's inability to listen to its fans. As actor Joel Kinnaman later admitted, much of the reboot's missteps stemmed from not taking into account what RoboCop meant to those who loved the original. The film attempted to modernize the story with an anti-imperialistic slant and sanitized action, but these changes only served to alienate a dedicated fanbase that craved the original's gritty, uncompromising vision. Furthermore, the cultural context that made the original a scathing critique of corporate power and government corruption has shifted. While some elements of the reboot's commentary are arguably more relevant today, the overall execution feels disjointed and too calculated, lacking the raw passion that originally defined the franchise. The reboot's sterile approach and overemphasis on spectacle leave fans with a profound sense of loss, the feeling that the soul of RoboCop has been stripped away in favor of a safe, corporate-friendly product. Ultimately, by failing to honor the emotional and thematic core that made the original a classic, the 2014 RoboCop ends up as a forgettable rehash, a film that might look good on paper, but lacks the heart and grit that captured the imaginations of a generation. Despite its technical polish and hefty budget, the reboot ended up feeling like a missed opportunity, an example of how even a well-known franchise can falter when it sacrifices artistic vision for commercial appeal. As we look back on RoboCop 2014, we're reminded that sometimes, to capture the true essence of a story, you have to risk embracing its darkness, its complexity, and its raw humanity. But hey, that's just our take. What do you think went wrong with RoboCop 2014? And could a future reboot ever reclaim the original's edge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's biggest missteps and triumphs. This video was made by movie fans, for movie fans.